Hi guys, welcome back to another Three Amigos episodes. This is Stanton, this is
Keedon!
Keedon, and today we're talking a little bit about the M9 Monochrome. All right. So first of all, as a disclaimer, I have to admit I've been gassed. So I've made a previous video comparing one of the cameras that I had, which was the Epson RD1,
Yep.
and I compared it to owning a Leica M9. Now both share certain similarities in that they're both CCD sensors, but after seeing your guys' response to the video, I was like, so I've shot with the M9 and the M9M before, Keaton's cameras,
Yep.
and I felt like, actually, you know what? You guys have a valid point. I can't really compare a camera without actually owning one.
Yep.
And so here we go. New M9 Monochrome with
That's right.
new lens.
What's the lens?
So this is what we call the 50 millimeters Summicron f2, and this is what we call the rigid. Yeah, so the rigid. So all the 50 millimeter lenses before this were collapsible because they were the screw mount. So this is the version 1 Summicron, and it's the first sort of bayonet mount that was created by Leica. Now, what's quite cool about this lens is that even though it's a really old lens, but it's a lens that's quite sought after. And I must say, having only shot for about a week or so on this camera, that the photos that you get from it are pretty magical. Very, very cinematic, very film-like, and I think it's a pretty magical pairing with the M9 Monochrome.
Yeah.
So, let's get into like the main gist of this video.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about the M9 Monochrome. So me as someone who's newly owning this camera, and you as someone who's owned this camera for quite some time.
Yep.
So Keaton, tell me, what do you think about the M9 Monochrome?
Actually, when I bought the M9 as the first digital M camera, and because I really like the color, and I fell in love with the sound of the shutter, right? But then,
so just for everyone to hear.
Yeah.
For us, okay, great. I mean, listen to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so unique in terms of a digital camera. But I got the color version first. And then after a while, I started to look at the monochrome because one of the problems of M9 is the ISO sensitivity, right? You can't go up too much. So 200 ISO is probably the best for color.
And what would you max it out as? For
probably just 200. I won't go in.
800? No?
Just get an Oculus. Just get an Oculus. Yeah. But 800 is just noisy.
Okay.
It's noisy. So it's not actually usable. And I turned my M9 color photos to black and white because sometimes it's just so noisy you can't use it, right? I really like the black and white with the noise. It just looks like an old film. Like even after you scan it, you see the grains. So then I decided to look at M9 Monochrome. And I talked to my Leica dealer. I said, if you have one, let me know. But I didn't really think he would find one. And then 1 or 2 months later, he rang me up and said, I found a M9M. And I'm like, and when you find your Leica dealer and he find you a camera, you kind of have to follow through. So I did the gentleman act, went down, put down some money, and walked home with an M9M. But I never regretted it because it's such a unique experience. With the monochrome, because they removed the color filter, I'm able to push the ISO to 800 and still, it's very nice. And I like how it doesn't have a live view because it just forces you to use it like a film camera. Yeah.
And with such a primitive sort of LED screen, you actually can't tell if the photo's sharp or not. And I think all it tells you is the composition. That's it. So actually, most of the time when you're shooting, you actually don't really look at the LED screen.
Yeah.
So it's the digital camera that gives you the most sort of film-like experience.
Yeah.
And so, as a bit of background story, I've tested thanks to our channel, I've tested all of the monochrome cameras.
So which one? Yeah. The M9,
so M9,
M,
M9M,
yep,
the M246,
and
then I've tried the
M10M,
and the M11M. In case which you haven't, please check out our videos for that.
Okay.
And I just felt like, the M246 was a great camera, but having the M10, I felt like it was a bit too similar. Like, it didn't have that wow factor.
Yeah.
And then the M10M was, again, an amazing camera. But, it's kind of ironic that the M10M and the M11M, for me personally, okay, and this might not, echo with you guys, but for me, that camera was just those two cameras are too perfect. Yeah, it's
To what?
it's too
what?
perfect. And too perfect, it's not a Leica camera.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Say it. What is it? What is it?
yeah. So I feel like the M10M, M11M, like they're both like so good, so technically advanced,
Yep.
so user friendly.
Yep.
But it's just like when you shoot with multiple systems with the Nikon, the Fuji, like I just felt like I looked at the photos and I felt like there's nothing that really stands out. There's nothing that pops in the photo. And so I've owned those. I've borrowed and used those cameras for like weeks, and it's just like I liked it, but it didn't stick with me.
Right.
And then so what happened was that if you check out one of our videos that's going to come out, I went to one of the older sort of Leica camera stores, and there were a bunch of old timers there, and these are people who have owned most of the Leica cameras available in the market, and all of them have this like affinity and loyalty to the M9M.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, if people have been taking
Listen
photos,
to the experience.
listen to the old folks.
Yeah.
And so I bought it, and man, after a week of taking photos, like can't go back. Like the photos from this camera is amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's so unique.
Yeah.
That there's a film-like tone to it.
Yeah.
And yet when you actually like when you stop down a little bit on the lenses, it's actually really sharp. And so like it blows
18 megapixels.
Exactly.
It's 18.
Okay.
And still it's very usable.
Yeah.
In 2023.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're printing like billboards the size of buildings, otherwise, 18 megapixels is very usable.
Yep.
What I find from the photos is that definitely exposed for the highlights, because it tends like it's hard to recover the highlights. So so whereas with the shadows, this camera does really well. So I'm blown away from just 1 week of using this camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you shoot RAW or you shoot JPEG?
Most of the time I just shoot RAW. I think just because you want to leave that room for you to edit, for push and pull in post processing.
Yeah.
Although obviously the JPEGs from this camera are amazing, and I think it's quite funny because like there's a limit and capacity in terms of the SD card, in terms of the SD cards that you can use.
Oh yeah.
So it's like if you're shooting RAW and you're trying to shoot like continuous, you can't.
Yeah.
So there's always like reading card errors. Reach your buffer after like 3 photos.
Yeah.
So it does sort of mimic that film experience in a way. Yeah. So that will be one of the cons, but at the same time, one of the sort of nice things about this camera.
Yeah. I mean, for the SD, what is the size that you're using for this?
I'm using a 32 gig.
Yeah, 32.
But I think that's the max that you can use.
You can't use any newer or larger SD cards because the camera is just too old. They couldn't recognize the new ones. So the good news is the 32 gigabyte SD cards are quite cheap.
Yeah.
Right. So you just buy like, I think in Hong Kong it's like $30-something.
Yeah.
One, just buy 10.
Yeah.
Not to sell out.
Yeah.
What do you think about the JPEG coming out of this directly?
Actually, I never tried the JPEG.
Never tried it.
Yeah, because it's
just too new, man.
Yeah, it's too new. I mean, it's like shoot RAW, right?
You shoot RAW. Yeah.
Junior would say always shoot RAW.
Yeah.
Right?
The RAW guy.
Always 8K shoot RAW. Yeah.
Always RAW.
Yeah. So
I mean, for M9 and M9M, I shot RAW in the past, but recently I found myself shooting JPEG more because I just want to use it for what it is.
Okay.
And I know RAW is alright. You can push and pull, but you're using a CCD sensor, right? So, and you can tweak some of the settings so that if you like a bit more contrast, you can edit in. And it's RAW. A JPEG just looks like you scanned a film photo anyways.
Yeah. So even though I think there are a few things that we really love about this camera, there are definitely some cons. Okay, one of which we mentioned was the SD card. The second issue is that if you're really looking into purchasing like an M9 or M9M, then definitely
the sensor issue,
you need the biggest problem is definitely the CCD issue because of the corrosion. So if you're looking in the market on eBay or whatever platform you're looking to, so make sure that the CCD has been replaced. That's one important thing. Because Leica no longer replaces the CCD sensor.
They don't.
So I know there are a few guys out there who are going to replace the sensor, But apparently, it's not a cheap job.
Yep.
It's not an easy job, and it
Yep.
doesn't guarantee that your sensor is going to work afterwards.
Yep.
So, you know, it's funny how like because of this sort of rarity and you know the difficulty in finding good condition ones is that the prices of these cameras have been going up nonstop.
It's more than M246.
Yeah, so it's the oldest monochrome of the bunch.
It's
but
the first monochrome.
the first
of the
monochrome,
bunch.
but it's not the cheapest one.
It's gaining in price.
And if not, give it a couple years.
Yep.
Now that I have one, you guys can go fight for it. It's a camera that I think if you're looking at as obviously I'm not saying cameras are an investment, but that's something to consider, like the resale value. And so this is a camera that in a couple years time is gonna cost more than an M10M.
I think in general the M9 and the M9M just reaches the legendary status, which is weird because you look at M8, it's also CCD, although it's not full frame. It doesn't have that status.
Yeah.
So I think if you're in the market for something special and you really like the old vintage flavor of Leica, but you want digital, then the M9, M9M is probably the camera to go for.
Yeah, it is. So so I think like you have a selection of lenses, and with the M9, like what sort of lenses would you recommend to go with it?
Yeah, so it depends on what you like in terms of the black and white photos. Like you chose a rigid, which is actually quite a legendary lens. Even for vintage lens, it's quite sharp, especially if you stop down. But for me, for black and whites, I actually like modern looking photos that are sharper.
Okay.
So I found myself gravitating towards the APO 50. Although the sensor is only 18 megapixels and it's black and white, so all the chromatic aberrations will not matter. But I just like how it can capture details.
Yeah. So
even wider.
So we were looking at the photos on the computer just now, and I was blown away by how sharp actually the photos are. Exactly. On a 1960s
something
1950s or 60s lens, like the photos are so sharp.
Yeah.
And there's so much detail. And yet at the same time, you have the sharpness in the in-focus areas, and yet you have that sort of like
creamy
bokeh. Yeah, you have that sort of like painting, painting S background, and that's something really unique.
It's just the glass and back there.
Yeah, it's not like when you play with vintage lenses, it's not by all means clinically sharp, but it's a very pleasing sharp, and yet you get that contrasting bokeh, and it's like
especially in black and white, because these lenses are actually made for black and white photography. If you think about it, color film didn't exist back then, right? So they are tested and adjusted based on black and white photography. So it's optimized for black and white in a way.
Yeah. So in case you guys are wondering, like, why does someone need so many versions or so many different lenses for the same focal length? It's because I think, and that's one of the videos that we'll be doing soon. It's like comparing vintage and modern lenses.
We do 50s.
Yeah, we do 50s.
50s and 35s.
Yeah. How do you compare them on, like vintage, how do you compare them black and white film and color film and on digital? I think that would be an interesting sort of test to do.
So I think in summary, this is a great camera in terms of collective purposes. There's lots of meaning behind, lots of first being first monochrome, and it's great. That's great photos.
Like I've been so impressed by this camera that like having had you having had several different Leica cameras, it's like I can almost say like if I were to only keep one Leica camera.
No way. This one?
Yeah.
Whoa.
I mean, this.
What about the white Leica?
I mean,
give it to me.
You have a ghost.
This is a fake ghost. Give it to me. Give it to me.
Like if I were to keep one camera, like I think like in terms of the uniqueness of the sensor, digital one, then this one would be
you're not selling your MP, right? The
like
MP.
Yeah, this would be the one to keep.
I agree. I mean, I have an M11, and I know that's going to be updated when they roll out the M11P or the M12. But like an M9 is here to stay. Yeah. And I really like what it offers.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, this is just like a first impressions for me and a very short review from Keedon. But we'll attach some photos for you guys to really appreciate like how amazing this camera is. And I'm going to be using this camera for a couple months, and we'll definitely have a more long-term review of what I think about this camera.
For you.
Yeah. And so definitely stay tuned, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And in case you guys have any questions with the video, then do let us know in the comments. Or if you guys have any suggestions of what sort of videos that you guys want to see, then again, do let us know in the comments below. Till next time, see you soon.
Bye-bye.